as always, I know it sounds dreadfully rude of me, but I do keep you on mute. Otherwise, the camera bounces for you and you don't want to appear on the video that goes up onto YouTube, although it is always kept as a private video, so nobody should be able to watch it unless I was specifically giving them the link. But it just makes the video flow a bit more easily. So if you have a burning question, the place to put it is in the chat box, and I have now got my chat box off to one side, so hopefully I'll be able to see if you do have any questions. We are expecting a few more to join us, but they'll be able to come in and join. And of course it's half term, so others are busy doing things. So I shall pack my register away. And before we get going, I need to sort of clear a little bit of space. But I thought you might like to see how my arrangement is getting on from last week. So it's just on its, yeah, I need to throw it away really. There's a couple of things I want to save. I think the snapdragons are still looking good, but the cosmos out of my garden actually went over at the weekend, but I thought I couldn't bear to take anything off. I wanted to show you what my arrangement looked like a week later. And of course, those of you who are watching the video recorded and didn't sign up for last week's class, you might be tempted to sign up. And the pay-as-you-go classes are £10 per session, so it's a bit cheaper if you book all 10 sessions. So I may well be picking things out of this for when we get on to the pumpkins. So let me know in the comments whether your arrangements are still going or whether you've ditched them and put them in the compost heap. I guess the beauty is, isn't it, that you don't have to keep the arrangements as is. They could be morphing and changing over time. So as you're freshening up the water, you could be going through and, you know, picking up dead bits, things that have gone over, and adding in more flowers. So that was last week. I shall just pop that out of the way over here, making sure I did actually put it down rather than just dropping it. And then just a quick conversation about what we're doing next week. And we're getting some lovely comments there. So I can see that some took the arrangements apart and revamped them. Fabulous, fabulous. So next week, we're going to go a tiny bit modern. We've gone sort of all homespun, quite traditional, going back to the old ways and the old-fashioned, you know, the classic, well, let's not say old-fashioned, but the classic shapes of flower arranging containers. The footed container from week 1, the windowsill vase from week 2, although I was very impressed by the very contemporary vases that some of you did bring along to class. That really made me think as well about what shapes I could be using for my flower arranging. So next week I'm going modern. Well, it's a modern in shape, and because we're doing a modern shape with a modern twist as the accessory next week, I have gone for my cube vase. So I've specifically tried to go for something that is sleek and slimline. Basically, it doesn't really matter what you bring with you. It needs to be something quite watertight. And it could be something, you know, traditional. Please don't go out and rush out and buy a new container if you haven't got anything exactly like this. Have a look at what you've already got and just think in your mind, we're going to do a modern arrangement, and perhaps to go for something that's sleek rather than ultra fancy. This could be a ceramic flower pot, so perhaps one of your house plants needs a bit of a holiday and you can jump out into another pot for a while and you could reuse your ceramic flower pot. Of course, my container is see-through. I'm going to be using flower foam, but of course you're starting to learn the other options for if you don't want to use flower foam, you could be gridding across your container. And using you know, the biodegradable foam or the agri wool that's on the market, whatever suits you. But I am slipping back to flower foam next week, and of course you're going to see my unsightly flower foam. So one of the things I am going to bring with me are some big leaves. So I'm going to have the flower foam inside my container, and then to disguise that, I'm going to line the container with a big leaf. Now we're going to do the modern bit we're doing is a bit of paged fruit. So we're going to come up quite tall. And I have got some Medolino sticks for this. Now, don't panic at this point, but if you do go to a flower club regularly, I reckon you've probably used these in the past. They're a sort of type of thin cane, and they do have a bit of play to them. They're slightly flexible, like all things, if you crease them too much, they're going to break. If you can't find these, and I think you possibly might find it tricky to find these or prohibitively expensive to find these. Again, I was gifted these. They come in different shades of pink and russet, that you could use sticks from your garden. So that again, I'd have to have a little bit of give, but if you've got dogwood or a willow, you could reuse those. And what we're going to be doing is caging some fruit. Now, imagine this is an apple. It's not actually, it's one of those lemon cucumbers. And I haven't got around to eating it, and it's probably on its way out to the compost heap. So we're going to imagine putting our flower foam in here, having our sticks in here, but we're going to cage the fruit, and I'll show you how to do that, just as an extra twist. I thought it was quite nice using fruit, apples around the time of bonfire night, and then I've suddenly got myself confused. When did you used to go apple bobbing as a child? Was it for Halloween or was it for bonfire night? So let me know in the comments whether you're H for Halloween or whether it's a B for bonfire night when you used to go apple bobbing as a child. And if I've got the date wrong, it is actually Halloween. I'm then going to change my inspiration and say the inspiration for this arrangement next week using small apples is going to be toffee apples for bonfire night. So I think I have got, it looks like the consensus is apple bobbing is for Halloween. I guess the witches, isn't it, and being dumped, and not for bonfire night, but there you go. So that's what we're doing next week, a sleeker, more modern arrangement, incorporating some sticks, and I'm going to have some fruit suspended in my arrangement. So we're going to go quite high, you know, a couple of sort of spikes up here. And because we're going modern, not only am I going to have a big leaf to cover my container, but I'm going to go for larger leaves on the top as well. So I would have used Fatsia, and I've just remembered that I've thrown away my Fatsia. I was using my live classes this week, but I've got my eye on, there's some fig trees around town that have their leaves that are hanging over the public footpath. So I might, you know, 2 or 3 fig leaves. I might pick some conkers in the, you know, horse chestnuts in their cases. I might add those in, and just perhaps a minimal amount of greenery. So next week it's going to be about the technique and less about how many flowers that you've got. Although if you've got loads of flowers, use them. And of course, if you don't really like the modern technique I'm showing you, you can adapt what I'm doing and make an arrangement that pleases you. So that's for next week. So I'm just going to clear these bits out of the way. I've got some Alstroemeria flowers that have shed their lit petals. So let's tidy up a bit. So this week we are talking pumpkins. And I am stacking my pumpkins. Normally, probably a bit like you, I take the lid off, I carve a, you know, the spooky face, I put the candle in, and Bob's your uncle, you're ready for Halloween. Or with my flower arranging and florist hat on, I would scoop out the middle of my pumpkin, perhaps put a jam jar inside with fresh water and arrange my flowers with that, or use my flower foam, saving the lid and sort of putting it on as a jaunty hat at the end. The sky's the limit, really. But I have decided to stack my pumpkins this year. So I have specifically chosen some flat-ish pumpkins. And I think if we lived in America, we would be able to go out and buy stacking pumpkins. But the pumpkins I've got are carving pumpkins. So they are basically round. So if you haven't got a pumpkin with you today and you want to make this arrangement, I would just take a few minutes, whether you're picking pumpkins in the field or you're going to your farm shop or the local supermarket, just to see whether you can get them, getting slightly smaller in size as they go up to make the stack, but also to make sure that they are roughly balanced. Now behind me, I don't know whether you can see, right on the corner here in front of my bread bin, I've actually got 3 squashes. I was getting slightly worried I couldn't get my pumpkins. So my pumpkins in the end cost me £1 a piece, but my squashes, the 3 of them there, came to about £9 because obviously they're a food stuff. But I have managed to just balance them, and if I'm really careful with this little yellow one there, it's got a sort of point on the bottom, which makes it quite hard to stack, because how do you stack something that's got a point? And I didn't want to chop off the end, because as soon as you create a wound, you slice your pumpkin over, it is going to rot, and you will think you've got this beautiful arrangement with your pumpkin. You'll be all smug thinking, I managed to carve my pumpkin and it didn't collapse, you know, a few days later. And then you'll discover that slowly it looks whole, and then when you go to move it and get rid of it, it will just collapse in your hands. And that's part of the reason why I'm not carving mine or cutting them open, because Halloween, you know, is next weekend, and I don't want my pumpkins to have gone over before then. So that's another reason for stacking them. And also, if you are going to use squashes, it's a food stuff and it's a bit of a waste of food really if you're going to have your squashes rotting before you can use them. I will say as well, beautiful as the squashes are, because they come in a much wider colour palette, they are really, really hard to cut open because they're grown for the flesh. The flesh is really thick inside your squash, and the bit with seeds was probably quite small, whereas in the halving pumpkins, the flesh is just a narrow strip round, and you've got the void of the bit with all the seeds in, which is quite large in comparison. And the next question I've got for you, if you want to answer me in the comments, is, are you using fresh flowers or are you thinking of using dried? So perhaps fresh or dried in the comments. And I'm just wondering what it is you're thinking of using, because that will affect the mechanics a little bit. If you're using fresh flowers, you will need to arrange your flowers in the medium. I'm getting a few not sures there in the comments, so I'll keep you, I'll carry on talking and then perhaps it'll help you make your mind up. So fresh flowers will either need, they will need a water source. So you're either going to need some flower foam or some moss if you want to go flower foam free. And if you want to use dried, you could use the dry flower foam, or you could use straw or hay to make the substance, the medium to arrange your flowers in. So let's talk about flower foam first. I'm going to give you a demonstration of this because I've decided I'm going to use my dried flowers. So I'm going to talk in more detail about that. If you've decided that you want to use fresh flowers for your pumpkins, and what I'm imagining is like a Victoria sandwich cake. Bottom layer here, layer of jam where your flowers are going to be, pumpkin on top. I don't take my other hand away, but I'm going to try a 3-stacker. I may change my mind in due course. So you need to have something between your layers that will your flowers can survive in. So this is one of the great opportunities. If you ever soak too much flower foam, and I tell you, you need to wrap it up into a plastic bag. This is an old bag that had frozen vegetables in it. So I'm using this today as my demonstration piece. So I've got a piece of foam off there, and I'm going to slice it in half just to give me, it's a couple of centimeters. And what I'm going to do is to place it onto my pumpkin. And if you've got a bit of a stalk, you can sort of impale it on the stalk. Now there's going to be a problem that arises next, and this is where we were talking, every week we talk about whether your arrangements look balanced, visually, but also the other element of balance is whether they're actually balanced. So when you pick up your very heavy pumpkin and put it onto your piece of wet flower foam, is it going to balance? It's not bad, it's not bad at all. But you can see that this is something that you're going to have to be very careful about, either making in situ or just being super careful when you move it to where you want to have it. So you'll probably have to take the arrangement apart. Now, the other thing will happen here, if you freshly soaked your flower foam and you put your second pumpkin on top, the weight of that pumpkin is going to squish your foam a bit, and you will end up with the water running down the side of your pumpkin. So this is another reason why I have saved a piece of flower foam I soaked earlier, because it's just dried out slightly, and I'm hoping I've got that right balance between there being enough water in there to keep my flowers alive, but I haven't got so much water that it's streaming down over the sides of my pumpkin, my bottom pumpkin. But if that was to happen, I would just, I would soak my flower foam and perhaps just leave it on your draining board for 5-10 minutes. Come back to it and just make sure as you were arranging, you were doing it on a kitchen surface that you could wipe down, and to have an old cloth or a tea towel ready so you could mop up any spills. So it sounds like we're going to have some artificial flowers as well. I can see dried pussy willows, eucalyptus, and I do know that you've been talking about using fake pumpkins as well. So I think if you're using fresh flowers with your fake pumpkins, this would work quite well, because the upper pumpkins aren't going to be so heavy as your fresh it's not going to squash so much onto your fresh flower foam, is what I was going to say. So that will give you the idea of what we're going to be doing. And when you come to your arrangement, we're just basically going to poke flowers in there to create this floral collar between the two. And imagine if I had my top pumpkin up there. And this is where if you have got any misshapen pumpkins at the bottom, of course, you can just impale that onto your piece of foam and nobody needs to know that it had a point in it. And actually, even me just pressing that into that older piece of foam, immediately the water came out of the edge, but it does work quite well. So just have a think about how high you want your stack to go. The higher you go, the more prone it is going to be to falling over, and it's going to get heavier and heavier. But just think about having your biggest pumpkin at the bottom and then going gradually smaller and smaller and smaller. So how are we going to create this project if we don't want to use fresh flower foam because we want to go eco-friendly, or we're going to be using dry flour, so you don't need to have a wet medium? So what we could do here is to create a little base. So I'm going to show you how to make this. I've made a mini wreath and I put that onto my bottom pumpkin, and then that gives a platform and this buffer. You can see what I mean about the Victoria sponge. I've got my sponge cake here, my sponge cake here, and my jam layer is the piece of straw. And that is helping me with a bit of balance because it's got more of a greater surface area for the pumpkin to balance on. And you just need to size the little piece of the wreath that you're going to make the circle according to the size of your pumpkins. And I will say, probably this one is a little bit too big and possibly a little bit too fat. So I'll have to have a think about that. I've got a kinky angle there, so you can see how it does help you, really balance things out a little bit. So what I'm going to do then is to bring over my second camera and I'll show you how I made that little buffer ring. It's going to help my pumpkins sit square on top of each other, that also provides the medium through which to arrange my flowers in. So if you had got fresh flowers and if you had moss, you would make the little wreath in exactly the same way. I've got straw. I couldn't get hold of any hay. Hay would have been softer and slightly finer, but we have chickens. So my husband went out into the shed where he keeps the fresh bales of hay, and he's given me a bag of hay, and it's quite a large bag of hay. And I'm going to use just a small amount, probably a sandwich bag's worth, so you don't need an awful lot. So let me clear the decks down a little bit, and then I'll bring the other camera over, and then we can get started with the close-up work about what I'm doing. So I'm just going to move my bits and pieces out of the way. So off on the side, I've actually got my hot glue gun. I can't quite decide with my dried materials whether to hot glue them into position for speed or whether to wire them up. I'm slightly concerned about the density, the thickness and the sturdiness of the little wreath form as to whether I'm actually going to push my materials in. Because I'm using dry materials, they've got quite brittle stems, so I have got a backup. I'm either going to use my floristry wires to create artificial stems for my flowers or use my hot glue gun. So it's whatever you've got to hand. I should just move this out of the way. I'm going to take that down because no doubt it'll fall down. So just push that out of the way. And have you noticed that I've got another little footed container? So it's just that lifting things off the table a little bit. I could have my pumpkins, sitting square on the floor, but I thought actually it looks quite nice like this. And if you can't, if 3 pumpkins is just too much for you, you could always just put a single pumpkin on there and decorate that. And I'll show you how I've done an arrangement using flower foam on a single pumpkin. In fact, you can probably just see it off to the side, so I'll bring that in later on. So how are we going to make this handful of straw into this tiny wreath form, which we're going to use to sandwich and stick our pumpkins together? So it's quite easy to do. You'll need a piece of string or a piece of wire. I'm using here the paper covered wire, which if you've been coming to class for a while, I really love using this. So this one is actually a pale brown colour. And if I was doing this for myself at home, I would probably use this colour because it's going to fade into the colour of the straw. But because I wanted you to see what I was doing, you can see that I've used the green variety. So just really, hopefully, so you can see what I'm doing. So I have run off a small section of the paper covered wire. Just need to make sure I don't drop that. And I'm going to sort of create a sausage of the straw. So just in my hand. So it's hard to say how much. I'm going to go on the skinnier side to start with, and if I think it doesn't look robust enough, I can always add in more straw. So it's a little bit difficult, a bit like corralling cats. So when I start, I've kind of got nothing to go on. So I'm wrapping my wire around my straw and just doing a twist tie. And this is why I like this paper covered wire so much. You don't need to tie a knot, but you could be using, you know, household string, garden twine. You could be using, if you make Christmas door wreaths regularly at all, your mossing wire, the binding wire for that, whatever you choose. So I've tied it on there, just my version of a knot. I've just twist tied it to start. And then I take my piece of wire or my piece of string and I'm binding it over. So you will find this much easier to do than me, because I'm trying not to knock my camera. Can you see there that I've just got the pieces of string going around? And what you'll need to do is to measure up and just, again, because I've got that wire on there and I can sort of bend it round, and how big, did I want it to be this big or quite small? So I want mine to be quite small. It's almost like I'm creating a little nest on the top there. So I think probably that little bit looks like a little bit of a smile. I've got these loose bits at the side that haven't bound in yet. So what I'm going to do is circle it round in my hand. So this is the bit I've bound and this is the bit that's loose. And while holding it in my hand, I'm now going to go in and out of that central hole to bind everything together. So probably I've got about a metre of string, I would think. And then I've got these little leftover bits. I can either cut those off or just keep binding around. I think I'm just going to keep binding around until I have used all my wire up. And if you're really clever, you can, finish off where you started. And you could just twist, tie the ends together or tie a knot. But for this, I ended somewhere else. So I just need to make sure I tie off securely. And the way that I do that is to loop it round one of the other pieces of string. And because it's that bind wire, it will twist and hold in place. So I have got a rough round here. So let's get rid of the straw. If you had made this using hay, the hay is much finer and easier to use on your hands. And you might get some bits, sort of pleasing bits that stick out a little bit. My bits are a little bit rough and chunky. So I might just, the really woody bits, if straw can be woody, I might just trim them. But again, it depends on how you work, whether you want it to look sort of quite rustic or whether you want it to be ultra neat. So then I would bring my pumpkin into view, add in my little crown. I've made a little wreath, and then take my hands away, balance the pumpkin there. So this is what the technique is. And in fact, I quite like this with, if you wanted to make a nest of your pumpkin, you could, put it in your little container and make a little vignette, as they say, to display your materials. So what I'm going to do now is bring the camera back to me, because everything else you want to see is a side-on view of how I place the materials into the little wreath form I've made. So I shall switch back the camera. So I've got a supply of dried flowers. So I must admit, this supply of dried flowers are the flowers I can't bear to get rid of when I've bought flowers for classes, if I've been given flowers. So I've got Eryngium thistles here that have come out of previous bouquets I've bought, and I've kept them. I have got some yarrow, which I think you probably saw in week 1 of this series of Zoom flower class. My Jerusalem sage, which grows off a wall down near me. I've got a little bit of lavender, a little bit of limonium, and some supermarket roses that I've dried. So that's the feel that I've got. And the other thing I particularly wanted to show you was my sunflower heads. So these were supermarket sunflower heads. So they weren't huge, but reasonably big. These ones, I've just let them dry naturally. And these ones here, I've dried in silica gel. So can you see how much more perfect they are? This one's gone a little bit gnarled. And this one looks more, more of a perfect look. So I thought it might be quite nice to incorporate those into my arrangement. So I shall put my flowers across there. I'm going to make sure that's my big pumpkin at the bottom. Put on my little grid, my little crown, little wreath, and then come up like that. So I've got this little bit of space here. So you can imagine when I want to add my flowers, it's a matter of putting them around the edge there. But of course, how do you put flowers on that haven't got any stalks? Well, that is when your hot glue gun is key, or you need to create a stalk by using your floristry wires. My preference here for speed is the hot glue gun. But if you did want to add in your stems, perhaps I should have kept my overhead camera over at this point, but I think I have shown you before. If I come really close, you need to hold your flower horizontally, and that's my floristry wire. It's very fine, and I've created a cross about 3/4 of the way up. So I've got this much wire underneath and this much on top, and I bend them down effectively. I have made, I'm not sure you'll be able to see that, a little shepherd's crook. And you put the shepherd's crook on, and with the extra long bit of wire, you wrap it around. So if you want me to show that to you later on in the make and create session, I can do that. But that would be the way of putting on legs onto your piece of plant material in order then that you could basically stab it into your flower foam without risking your stem. I need to have that a little bit shorter without risking your stem breaking. So I'm going to come a little bit shorter, do exactly the same thing, the fresh wire, and poke that through. What you'll find, now I've wired that up, the wires come out over here. They may be too long and that you're going to buckle. So you could either cut them short, but what I normally do is bend them over. We don't want to be cutting and cutting all the time. And it just means that there's sort of the knuckle of the wires going in rather than the points, because you'll find the points will break a little bit, and then you can push them in. But you'll see here that I'm struggling to push it in because my straw wreath form is very dense, and that's why I say that you might find the glue gun is your friend. So let's have a look with the glue gun. So I've cut off 2 poppy heads and lean across, get my glue gun. So what I tend to do is put glue along the line of the stem, and it then sort of has a longer area to catch rather than just putting a bit on the end. So I'm looking through my camera lens here. Where shall I put this? Can I find a piece? Yes, that's going in quite nicely. Although I've chosen brown with brown, so it doesn't show up very well. I'll try and add a little bit of colour in on the next placement. So gluing that down and then poking that in. So that, for me, that's going in quite nicely actually. I much prefer the sensation of the poppy heads going in than I did with the Brunia, which is the dried South African foliage. So how about a tiny bit of colour? So again, it's the muted colour because these flowers are dried. This is sea lavender, so it's quite bushy. And you can imagine if I put one stem at a time, I'm going to be there all day doing it. So as it's dried, I can break it off the main stem and I give myself a little bunch. And then if I trim all those stems down, I just need to wrap a wire around that and then put it in as one piece. So I'm not going, one piece, one piece, one piece. It would just take me all day doing that. So I'm going to bundle them together with my floristry wire, wrap that round, so it sort of hangs down like that. And then I'm going to bend over the wires so they're a much more manageable length. Now for this to go in, I think I am going to have to place it towards me so I can see. And as with any flower arranging, you might need to brace yourself a little bit. So it's remembering this is just balance, precariously balanced. You could, if you wanted to, particularly if you've got the thin skin pumpkins, you know, get a good garden cane or something and just impale it right the way through. But again, that creates a wound, and I didn't want to add in, you know, damage my pumpkins. So that has gone in there quite nicely like that. And then you just continue all the way around. So I'm not going to go any further around because it's going to be like watching paint dry. So you can imagine what I'm going to do. I'm going to be putting my materials together. It looks much better close up. The camera's not quite picking it up, so I'll put in some photographs when I send out the video to you. What I'm seeing here is the contrast between the purple and the orange flesh of the pumpkin. I can see the woody texture of my poppies against the more seed-like quality of the brunia that I've got there. And then once I was happy with that, I would then come up, if I was feeling daring, just looking for my other little ring there, up at the top, and over here I saved my top pumpkin that had a stalk on it, and dare I take my hands away. Everybody breathe in. But you can see how it will start to work. So this ring at the top is slightly thicker than the one at the bottom, so I would prefer that to be slightly thinner. But it also means if you use the brown string or the brown bind wire, that you could stack your pumpkins and not put any flowers in at all, but you've just got this lovely stacked arrangement, which looks rather lovely. And then if you wanted to use the fresh flowers, let me just get rid of these dried for the moment and show you the fresh flower pumpkin you can do. So this is made in flower foam, so probably something more traditional if you're used to arranging flowers in a pumpkin. And I can show you the mechanics of this. I'm very careful. I'm going to lift that off. So I've got a little bit of a stalk on that pumpkin, and it was made on flower foam. And if I show you underneath, you can see the imprint of the stalk. So that was how I made it. Again, there's no container on this. So it's a matter of using your flower foam that's been slightly dried out, just being aware that you're going to get dribbles if it's ultra fresh. But the materials I've got in here, this was made a week ago and is still looking really great. I just thought that was mouldy there, but it's not. It's where it lay down on the field. You always have a bad side for pumpkins because of the way they grow. So in here, I've got sedum, I've got rose hips, I've got a piece of fennel, which you'll notice was featured in week 1 of the flowers we did. A little bit of the old man's beard and the buried ivy. So it may be, let's see whether we can do this. If you wanted to go, you know, fresh flower, imagine that as green and lush in the middle, and you know your top placement. This is a bit oversized because I've got my sizes wrong. Let's bring it down because it's not the right size, is it? Let's take it totally apart. But you could have your fresh flowers like that. So you can imagine it's got a lovely little topper. Do you want to have a fresh flower topper, or do you prefer the natural little quirkiness of the natural stem? But imagine that layer down at the bottom there as well, with the lovely greens and the russet reds of the autumn time. So I think I'm probably going to leave the demonstration there. And this is the beauty of you are able to come to class live, but as you're making and creating, I'll be finishing off as well. So I will probably, actually the wires went in really well. So a combination of the wires and the hot glue gun, I haven't quite decided, but it's just much easier when you're working, as you will be discovering if you're following along, is that you need to be able to constantly turning your work around so you can see what it looks like from all sides. So I will say goodbye to the ladies who are watching the record, and hopefully you've booked on for class next week. So next week it is the sleek and modern we're going for, and the inspiration being toffee apples for bonfire night. So I will stop recording now, and then we'll go to our live Q&A and then make and create afterwards.